Today we talk about Batman Arkham City Escape, the board game, clearly inspired by the video game. I haven't played the video game. I'm not a huge fan of video games. I prefer board games. But I'm a huge fan of Batman, so I'm always excited when I can play a game about superheroes in general, Batman specifically. I was excited about this one. My excitement didn't last all that much. Let me show you how the game works before we get there. Two-player game, a player will take on the role of Batman, represented by that cardboard miniature there, and Batman deploys there where the bat signal is. The villains will enter from here, that a player controls a horde of villains that enter from this row here and try to escape from Arkham City, and they do that by accident from this row here. Villains are represented by cards that are placed on the board initially face down when they enter, and then they may move face down, and that indicates when they are moving in a stealthy fashion, or they may flip up later, and that makes them move faster. Also, as you can see, there are cards placed face down on the board at the beginning of the game. What you see here is the setup. 5 of these setup cards come from a deck of cards that are beneficial to Batman, and 5 come from a deck that is beneficial to the villain player. You shuffle those 10 cards together, you place them face down, you do not know what those are and whom they're going to be useful to, but when a player enters a space containing a face down setup card, then the player can turn up that card. A face down villain that reveals a setup card also reveals his own position. In any case, the villain player goes first and rolls 4 action dice. These dice have 3 Arkham symbols and 3 Batman symbols, 50% chances of each. The villain player rolls the 4 action dice and receives an action for each Arkham symbol that is rolled. In this case 1, the villain player will receive between 0 and 4 actions each turn. Those actions can be spent in a variety of ways. For example, for a single action, the villain player can deploy up to 5 villains face down in his starting row. By the way, the stacking limit is of 1 villain per hex. And the villain player starts with a hand of 5 villain cards from his deck. Again, cards that are either villains or special effects, free actions. In fact, the villain player can also play a variety of powerful cards from his hand as free actions. For example, this one makes the villains much stronger. These 2 cards allow the villain to pretty much move so fast that it's almost impossible for Batman to capture them. Okay, one action is to deploy villains face down. Another action is for a single action to move any number of villains that are face down by 1 space. So they only move by 1 space, but no matter how many there are, they all move for a single action. Flipping a villain up, revealing the villain is a free action, and for an action, a villain can move by 2 spaces, a space-up villain. So for one action, you can move all those that are face down by 1 space, or for an action, a face-up villain by 2 spaces. Some of these cards that give benefits to Batman may be allies, such as Robin. Face-up villains that are in the same space as an ally of the Batman will capture that ally, and then a villain that has an hostage can move by 1 space, dragging the hostage for a single action. Allies have beneficial effects that usually are triggered at the beginning of Batman's turn. For example, Robin forces the villain player to discard cards until his hand is down to 3 cards, but the good effect of the allies is turned off when the ally is taken hostage by a villain. The other cards are beneficial to the villains. For example, this one allows to roll an additional action die, this one to draw an additional card at the end of the turn, And these can be eliminated by Batman if he goes in the space in which those cards are and performs certain actions. Very often spends limited resources doing so. But it's much harder for Batman to get rid of good evil cards than it is for the villains to get rid of good allies that could otherwise help Batman. In any case, another last action that the villain player can do with his actions is to draw a card from the deck of villain cards. Once the player is done with his actions, then he also draws a card at the end of the turn by default, more if cards that are in play on the board allow him to do so. After the villain's turn, Batman's turn. Batman is more reliable. Batman doesn't roll dice to get his actions. He will always receive a movement action each turn. He can spend an action in one of three ways. He can move by one space. That's it. That's his movement action. Or he can move from a sewer space to another sewer space. He teleports from sewer to sewer, so he needs to start on a sewer and in a sewer space. Also, there may be gargoyles on the board. These gargoyles may be revealed by cards, by setup cards, or they may be added to the board later using game effects. And there are various game effects that may allow Batman to do so. Then Batman, if gargoyles are available, can spend his action to grapple to a gargoyle that is up to 2 spaces away, so he goes on the gargoyle. And actually from there, he can keep jumping from gargoyle to gargoyle as long as the next gargoyle is no more than 2 spaces away. In theory, this is super good. It seems really that Batman could use gargoyles to jump from one side of the board to the other. In reality, this rarely happens because you may not have many gargoyles in the setup cards. You do not use all the setup cards of your side at the beginning of each turn, only part of them. So you may have none of those, or very few. You may have some, but they may be very far, and you don't get game effects that allow you to add the connecting one. So I haven't seen the gargoyles being used very often in my games. But this is the option. This is one of the ways in which Batman can move using his movement action. Because Batman may be able to get other ways of moving by using his gadgets in his utility belt. These are gadgets that Batman selects at the beginning of the game. He selects 4 of them from a deck of possible ones. Bat gadgets that are placed there are usually placed face down, so the villain doesn't know what they are at the beginning of the game. I place them here face up just to show you. Bat gadgets have a number of charges on them. When you reveal the gadget, you place tokens to indicate the number of charges. Each time that you use the item for its effect, then you remove a charge. In this case, for example, you move a face-up villain that is up to 2 spaces away from Batman to Batman's space. Batarang allows Batman to stun an opponent. In that case, the villain will not do damage if defeated in combat. Lion Launcher allows to move fast because Batman can move up to 4 spaces as long as he ends his movement in one of these rows here, the lateral rows, either this one or the other on the other side, that one. And of course, Batman will also fight. Otherwise, what is Batman doing running around like a madman? I mean, sightseeing? No, he wants to fight. When Batman enters a space containing an enemy, or when an enemy enters a space containing Batman, a fight will happen. So Batman may fight with villains during his turn or during the villain's turn. Each villain has a capture number that Batman is trying to match or to exceed with bat symbols that he will need to roll. But before rolling those dice, he needs to generate those dice, which he does by using combat cards. Batman starts the game with 5 combat cards. Each combat card has a combo point, a combo value printed on it, and the combo value is simply the number of dice that the card is worth. 1 die, 2 dice. Some combo cards also have specific effects that may combine with the gadgets in the Bat Belt, but Batman may not have the right gadget for the right effect, and other circumstances that may add combo points. For example, there's one additional 3 combo points if you've already played 3 or more combat cards. That's fine. So Batman plays as many cards as he wants from his hand, puts together the dice generated by the combo points here and by possible effects, grabs all of the necessary dice, up to 8. 8 is the maximum number of dice Batman can roll, rolls them, and counts the number of successes of bat symbols. For example, this is not good, because we have 3 successes out of 8 dice. The Joker has a capture value of 5, Batman fails. If Batman had rolled 5 or more, then the Joker, the villain, would have been captured. Batman would add that to his score pile, and that is worth 3 points for Batman. Also, Batman gets to roll this die that gives him advantages. 3 of these advantages are recharges. Each recharge allows Batman to put all of his charges back on one of the items on his belt. Batman may be able to add a gargoyle to the board, or to draw 2 cards, which is particularly good, or to draw an ally from the ally pile. Then an ally is added to the board, and the ally will generate good stuff, good effects for Batman, until the ally is taken hostage by the villains, which happens quite often, actually. But this is not the case. Batman hasn't been able to win, he doesn't get the card, he doesn't roll the die with the good stuff. What happens is that Batman has to read the retaliation effect. The Joker has one, and the villains have others. Hush is here, so I'll use Hush. When Batman loses a fight, then you simply implement the retaliation effect, which in this case is the villain player may move Hush up to 4 spaces. That's kind of a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then next turn, Hush spends an action to move 2. Hush is almost out of the board. Because of retaliation effects, villains are sometimes able to move incredibly fast. Another thing that allows the villain to move fast is a card that is called Sewer Surprise, so villains can be deployed in the sewers, and of course you can just flip them up, spend an action to move 2, and you're ready. Close there. There is the Tiger Helicopter, which also is particularly good. If Batman captured the villain this turn or the previous turn, then you move a villain and his hostage up to 3 spaces. Between the fact that they move by 2 when they're face up, and Batman usually moves by 1, and the other effects, these villains can go real fast. And Batman uses a lot of combat cards. As you can see, I would have used a lot of cards to have 8 dice here. I spent all of those cards, and now I have less cards, maybe I have 0. If I lost the fight and even get to roll the die, then may generate more cards, or may not. In any case, whatever happens at the end of the turn, Batman gets 1 card, 1 combat card back in his hand. In this case, a combat card actually generates 0 points, can only be used to re-roll dice. And this is what kind of determines the overall pace of the game. The villains keep getting stronger because they get more villains on the board, they get more cards that generate good effects for them, whereas Batman goes in waves. Batman's actions come in waves. He may launch a powerful attack, he may be able to use a lot of cool combo effects from the items in his utility belt, but then he needs time to put together combat cards, because he needs combat cards to win a fight, he needs to win a fight to recharge his items. So Batman does very well at the beginning of the game. Usually he wins 2 or 3 fights, he may put together 2/3 of the victory points that he needs to win the game, but then he finds himself depleted of combat cards at that point, usually also of charges, or not many charges are left, and very often if you have the charges but not the combat, then you can move close to the villains, but you cannot do anything, so what's the point? So, Batman does very well at the beginning of the game, then he finds himself without combat cards, and then the villains simply can avoid him. Then the villains flip up, start running, and he simply tries to recover. But the problem that I have with this game, the huge problem that to me makes this game one that most likely I will not keep in my collection, is the fact that all 6 games that I played the game 6 times, all games have had the same arc, have developed in the same way. That is, Batman does very well at the beginning, and the villain player just tries to build up momentum, but there is always a point in which Batman finds himself without enough resources to really counteract the power of the villains. The villains have put together a lot of powerful effects. The villains leave the board and win the game. 6 games, all 6 games Batman lost, which is bad enough. I think Batman will pretty much always lose this game. I think it will take an incredible amount of good luck for the Batman player and at the same time bad luck for the villain player for Batman to win, or some huge mistakes, some huge waste in resources for the villain player. But I think if the villain player is even madly competent in using his cards, it is going to be terribly hard for Batman to win. 6 games they played, Batman has never won. But what bothers me the most is that he always lost in the same way. The game could tell me a story, which is what I would love to see when I'm playing a thematic game about Batman, but the story has always been the same. Batman does it great, has a lot of adrenaline, then he loses his momentum and he doesn't regain it in time. Also, it's a game that for other reasons feels unpolished. There are strange things here and there. One wonders how much this game was play tested. Joker has an ability that allows him to put a victory point value token on the Joker. There are no victory point value tokens in the game. You can use another token, but it's still strange that it's like that. Calendar Man has an ability that the card says is triggered if it's Saturday or Sunday. And we scratched our head and we started looking at the rulebook, how you determine the day of the week in the game. It doesn't say that. And then we ruled that that means if you're playing it on Saturday or Sunday, which doesn't make any sense. In terms of game design, that really doesn't make any sense. If you're the villain player, you will never want to play this game on a Thursday. Friday, well, late Friday night, so that after midnight you can use that effect. You see, it's just strange. It's like, I don't know, somebody tried to put cool ideas in it, things that they thought be cool, but the entire design feels rushed, and there is, to me, a huge balance problem. Well, this is my point. I don't know that I want to keep playing a game that I always know how it works. It could theoretically be played as a solitaire. I tried it that way too, even with all the villain cards face up, so that the Batman knows where they are. The villains still win. The same story of initial triumph and final defeat of Batman still presented itself. So, to me, thumbs down. This is a game that disappointed me, and alas, I do not think it is going to stay in my collection.